Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into a fascinating, heavily debated philosophy that, honestly, secretly dictates almost everything in our modern world. I'm talking about the structure of global economies, the big political moves, right down to the daily choices we make. The whole idea that the ends justify the means is literally everywhere. So we're going to break down exactly where this concept comes from, how it operates in our lives today, and of course, the profound criticisms it faces. Let's get into it.
Just listen to this incredibly provocative idea for a second. You should break a contract whenever it benefits you. Keep your contracts only when they help you gain and hold power over others. I mean, wow, right? That is the core belief of the 16th century thinker Niccolo Machiavelli. He operated on this fundamental assumption that human nature is, well, inherently wicked. And because of that, moral rules aren't some untouchable divine laws. They're simply practical tools. Tools that you use to gain and hold on to power.
So here is our roadmap for This Explainer. We'll start with Machiavelli and real politics, trace this outcome-based approach into everyday life, see how it acts as a capitalist engine, systematically examine its massive costs, and finally ask, is it actually still relevant today? All right, part 1, Machiavelli and real politics. Let's lay the groundwork for how right and wrong are judged in the ruthless realm of power.
To really understand this worldview, we have to wrap our heads around real politics. This is what's called a teleological approach, which is just a fancy way of saying it's entirely focused on the end outcome. It completely strips away any grand ideological notions or strict feel-good ethical premises. Instead, it is intensely focused on practical reality. It's diplomacy based entirely on the boots-on-the-ground circumstances.
So the kicker here is that Machiavelli was really the very first major thinker to argue that an action is good, not because of some divine command, and not because it comes from a place of inner virtue. No, it's good strictly because of its end result. For him, the absolute highest purpose of social and political life is to attain and hold power. If what you do achieves that consequence, boom, it's a good action. The ends completely, 100%, justify the means. Moving on to part 2. Teleology in everyday life. Because this isn't just dusty 16th century history, let's scale this up. It's actually fascinating how a philosophy based purely on outcomes shapes our modern society. When the state takes a backseat and stops regulating people's personal affairs, individual liberty basically takes over. People start seeking their own utility and pleasure, which promotes incredible independence and risk-taking. In Western societies, this exact attitude has resulted in a massively faster pace of innovation. And socially? Because people want the freedom to seek their own pleasure, they tend to respect that same right for others. This outcome-based liberty has directly paved the way for totally diverse social structures. We're talking LGBTQ rights, the shift to nuclear and weekend families, live-in relationships, hookup culture, and the rise of single-parent or no-kid families. The whole shebang is driven by the sheer utility of personal freedom. And if we step back and look neutrally at the macro-societal level, we see that old traditions survive purely because they offer some kind of utility. Whether you're looking at caste systems, patriarchy, class systems, monarchies, or even democracies, from a strictly outcome-based perspective, these structures stick around simply because they provide a functional outcome or utility for the society that uses them. Okay, let's pivot to part 3, the capitalist engine. Because this exact same utilitarian philosophy is the absolute bedrock of modern economics. There is a direct, undeniable pipeline from personal freedom straight to the immense profit and efficiency driving Western capitalist economies. Think about the core principles here. First up, freedom of choice. Anyone can choose a profession regardless of where they were born, which historically sparked the industrial revolutions. Then you've got profit maximization. This motivates people to reinvest their money into business expansion rather than just buying luxury goods, which is exactly why we see so many massive unicorn companies emerging in the West. And finally, efficiency. Employers need the freedom to hire or fire as the market dictates. This ruthless flexibility is precisely why Western capitalist economies attract significantly more investment than Eastern markets where strict labor laws can really bottleneck an employer's freedom. The blind pursuit of utility literally builds this massive economic engine. When we compare how different governments operate, teleology heavily favors stepping back. Flourishing liberal democracies intervene as little as humanly possible, aiming to maximize the freedom and pleasure of their citizens. Contrast that with heavily regulated, flawed regimes, often called banana democracies, where governments completely stifle that utilitarian freedom to strictly regulate what their citizens can and can't do. But hey, even in totally free societies, government still matters.
At the policy level, massive initiatives are fundamentally designed using this exact same math: calculate and deliver the greatest good to the greatest number of people. We see this in massive national welfare policies, like the healthcare or financial inclusion schemes in India, Ayushman Bharat or PMJDY. The entire goal of these policies is to maximize utility for the largest possible chunk of the population.
Part 4. The cost of utilitarianism. Just as this philosophy starts to sound perfectly efficient, we have to look at the dark side.
The first major criticism points to a really severe personal toll. Critics argue that when outcomes and pleasure become your only goals, human beings tend to settle for lesser, physical pleasures instead of striving for a higher, chief human good. This mindset breeds intense materialism, rampant consumerism, and deeply unethical practices like the commodification of women. On top of that, this celebrated greed causes a staggering loss of societal values. For instance, the breakdown of familial care has led to a massive rise in old age homes in Western societies. It essentially turns life into this relentless, money-oriented race, which completely disrupts mental peace and directly contributes to tragic outcomes, like the rising suicide rates we see in the Western world.
Zooming out to the systemic level, prioritizing immediate benefits has caused some absolutely massive global fallout. If every single person blindly seeks their own pleasure without giving a second thought to others, societal order literally collapses. When you constantly compromise the how to get to the what, you open the floodgates to crony capitalism and deep-rooted corruption. And perhaps most alarmingly, if your cost-benefit analysis only ever looks at short-term gains, you get long-term disasters. The severe climate change crisis we are dealing with right now is a direct result of this short-sighted utilitarianism from the past.
Seeing this creeping menace of greed and corruption, philosopher Immanuel Kant stepped up and completely flipped this framework on its head. Kant argued the exact opposite of Machiavelli. He stated that the means are actually more important than the ends. Basically, how you achieve your goal matters fundamentally more than just getting what you want.
But here is the truly chilling part about the greatest good for the greatest number. It's the total failure of justice. If only the majority's benefit matters, utilitarianism has absolutely zero inherent framework to protect the minority. It promotes majoritarianism. It encourages this brutal survival of the fittest mentality that leaves the weak and vulnerable completely behind. Terrifyingly, under strict utilitarian logic, an act is considered ethical if it provides maximum pleasure to the greatest number. That means even highly violent or oppressive actions could theoretically be justified as moral as long as 51% of people benefit from it.
Because utilitarianism so often tosses the weak aside in the name of majority pleasure, thinkers like John Rawls had to step in. Rawls firmly argued that true justice must be the ultimate foundation of any society. You can't just sacrifice the rights of a few people to bump up the pleasure of the many. Justice and fairness have to be the starting line, no exceptions.
But beyond the deep morality of it all, just ask yourself, can we even truly calculate all the consequences in an emergency? Utilitarianism relies on what's called a hedonic calculus, basically doing the mental math of weighing all the potential pleasures and pains of an action. But that totally falls apart in the real world during rapid, emergent situations. When you have to make a split-second moral decision, you simply do not have the time to sit there and anticipate all the consequences, or accurately weigh the happiness of everyone involved. The math is quite literally impossible to do on the fly.
So, bringing us to part 5, synthesizing everything we've looked at today, is this incredibly complex, highly flawed framework actually still relevant?
The overarching takeaway from all our source material today is actually pretty striking. Yes, the flaws are profound. We're talking materialism, majoritarianism, and short-sighted environmental destruction. Yet despite these massive moral weaknesses and heavy criticisms, this philosophy remains undeniably relevant. It's still the dominant engine that secures individual freedom and autonomy at a personal level. And for better or worse, it remains the primary mathematical framework that governments use to strive for the greatest societal good for the largest number of people.
As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Take a look at your own choices. How do you balance the greatest good in your life? When you make a decision today, are you focused purely on the end result, or do your means matter just as much to you? It's a question that has quite literally defined entire nations, and it's one you have to answer for yourself. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive, and keep asking the big questions.